Everyone, and welcome to the Addressing the Global Food Waste Problem workshop, where we will be discussing the global food waste problem through an interactive approach. This event is the Kickstarter of our food loss and waste campaign here at the World Food Forum, where you'll be able to engage with different initiatives. Together with our partners, the World Food Program Free Rice and the International Fund for Agricultural Development. In this workshop, our objectives are to spotlight on different solutions for the food waste problem through expert interactions, while we also raise awareness and try to mobilize youth to join the food loss and waste reduction.
So we expect that everyone will leave this workshop here today with further knowledge of the global food waste crisis and its consequences, but we also want to facilitate a collaboration and knowledge sharing among all participants to identify practical and sustainable solutions to food waste, and also strengthen the commitment at an individual, community, and policy level. And to get us all started, we'd like to go over a brief overview of the global food waste problem. When we talk about food waste, we are talking here specifically about the decrease in quantity or quality of food that results from decisions and actions by retailers, food service providers, and also consumers. On an annual basis, there is over 1.3 billion tons of food that is thrown away, and this impacts the environment with 3.3 billion tons in carbon dioxide emissions, which also has a direct impact on economics. To reverse our current food waste trends would mean to save enough food to feed 2 billion people. And we are here today to inspire this movement of change and address the missed opportunities that we have with food waste to improve global food security.
Now, we would like to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Mr. Divine Mija, the Deputy Director of the Food Systems and Food Safety Division here at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Welcome, Mr. Divine.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. Welcome again to this session, distinguished participants. I had a presentation, but I am having some difficulties connecting, so I will go ahead and deliver my my address. Just looking. Hopefully, you can see me clearly, and there are no connection difficulties. Well, the introductory remarks that were just made have already highlighted the importance of this issue of food loss and waste. And when we are talking about this issue, we are basically invoking the connected series of events that happen from the point where a food product is produced on farm or in an aquaculture pond or other production system, and then conveyed across the food supply chain from the harvest, post-harvest handling, distribution, retail, and eventually to the consumer, which might be at the household level, but also possibly in food service settings like restaurants or other out of home venues. So when we talk about food loss, we are looking at the decrease in the quantity or the quality of food that happens from that post-harvest all the way to the retail part of the chain. And then when we're referring to food waste, we then are looking at the situation around where the consumer comes into play. So in the household or in food services. So that is basically the distinction that we want to give here. And the importance of having that distinction is that it then also speaks to the types of interventions that are put into place to address the issue. Now, the recent estimates that FAO has made is that up to 13.2 percent of food produced globally is lost, after harvested, but before the retail stage. And then the UN Environment Program, UNEP, estimates that 17% of total global food production is wasted, mostly in households, but also in food services and retail. So think about it. This is an immense quantity of food. When we're talking about 13.2% being lost, for example, it amounts to hundreds of billions of of um, food. It also has implications in terms of the financial and economic dimension. But it is important to underscore that the situation that we have differs as we move across the globe. The global estimate I gave you was 13.2%, but when you look at regional specificities, you would see that some regions, like in sub-Saharan Africa, the levels can go as high as 20%. So there is that variation. But what are the implications? When you look at this, high levels of losses and waste against a backdrop of significant food insecurity and malnutrition around the world. Take, for example, just looking at the number of people that face hunger. It is estimated that between 691 to 783 million people faced hunger in 2022. And that projections show that 600 million people will be chronically undernourished by 2030. Billion people were moderately or severely insecure in 2022, and so on and so forth. The point being made here is that we have immense quantities of food being lost against a situation where we have very, very far-reaching hunger consequences. Now, the effects in terms of the developmental angle are not only limited to food insecurity and malnutrition, as I have highlighted. Food loss and waste also has an implication on the livelihoods, on natural resources, on the environment. When you look at greenhouse gases, for example, that generate climate change, it is estimated that 8 to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and so on, arise from food loss and waste. So that's an immense quantity of greenhouse gas footprint, which is generated just because food is lost and wasted in the chain. There are also other significant natural resource and environmental impacts of food loss and waste. It is estimated, for example, that the water that is used to produce food that is eventually lost or wasted is equivalent to a whopping 250 cubic kilometers of water. Imagine that. We're talking about situation where in some regions, like in the Sahara or the Sahel and the Near East, there are immense and significant constraints in terms of water for agriculture. So we use these inputs like water, we destroy the natural environment, we destroy biodiversity, and other natural resources, but then we produce food which then is not used for the end for which it was produced. Not only that, it also contributes to various negative repercussions like the greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental damage uh, we tend to see around the world. So food loss and waste has a huge impact in terms of food security, environmental damage, unsustainable use of natural resources. But in addition, it means money, it's resources. So it has implications financially, but also economically. Financially for the actors that work in the food system, but also for countries and parts of countries like regional governments and urban areas. So all of these units do suffer from the negative effects of food loss and waste. So therein, I just wanted you to understand it's kind of it's a two-sided coin. I have highlighted some negative, very important negative effects, but it also means that these are immense opportunities that we have for fostering development of humankind and the world. If we can address food loss and waste, we can improve the performance of food systems, of agri-food systems, and we can then promote economic development in a sustainable way while ensuring that everybody has enough to feed and enough nutritious food to eat. So the point I am making here is that food loss and waste reduction provides us an opportunity to achieve triple wins in terms of economic progress, environmental stewardship, but also providing social opportunities for disadvantaged groups like women and also the youth, most of whom are here gathered today. So the interventions that, as you can imagine, for addressing food loss and waste, they span a very broad continuum, a broad range from policies to awareness raising to providing investments and addressing infrastructure. But I wanted to use this as an opportunity to then underscore the opportunity that it offers for various stakeholders. It's consumers, it's actors in the value chain, but very importantly, it provides an opportunity for youth with the innovative spirit that the youth have for addressing this issue and also addressing the wider problems that we face globally. So if you take, for example, the application of innovative technologies, these can be applied across the supply chain, across the value chain from production, harvesting, and all the way to retail, and even improve the way that consumers consume the food that they eat. But we can also use technologies to leverage advances in digitization. If you take, for example, the Internet of Things, it can help us to support the monitoring of process conditions along the value chain. And if we monitor these conditions, we are in a better position to prevent food loss and waste. Another very good example is the use of social media. Social media can be applied to various aspects within this food supply chain to improve the functioning of the food supply chain. For example, improving marketing, e-commerce, and the delivery of services. So I wanted to conclude by just highlighting some of these examples that provide opportunities for involvement of the youth in improving the performance of agri-food systems in general, but more specifically addressing the whole issue of food loss and waste. Now, and in closing, I wanted to make a call for action. There are various avenues through which everybody connected, and in particular our youth populations, can get involved globally and also at local level. There is a coalition for to promote and facilitate work in this area. It is called the Food is Never Waste Coalition, and it was formed from the Food Systems Summit. So I encourage you to join this coalition and be actively involved in it. There is also a pledge that was launched during the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. I also would like to join this pledge and make pledges individually, but also institutionally to improve the performance of the food system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Divine, for such an insightful presentation, a great introduction into food waste, and especially for highlighting what we as youth can do and the different opportunities that we as youth have. Now, I would like to leave the floor and introduce you to our moderator for our first panel, Ms. Shreya Venkat, our Youth Policy Board member here at the World Food Forum. Shreya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and the World Food Forum and the Food and Agriculture Organization for inviting me to moderate these incredible few discussions we're going to be having today. Mr. Divine, it was very inspirational to hear your words. And I hope you all are inspired as I am to dive straight into some more exciting conversations. So before we get started with our awesome panel lineup, I wanted to let the audience members know that, as we are going through the panel, if you have any questions, which I'm sure you will, feel free to add them in the question and answer section at the very bottom. You can type it there and we will be asking those towards the end of the panel. So without further ado, let's introduce our speakers, our panelists for today. So first up, we have Ms. Sarah Kirby-Young from the city of Vancouver. We have Ms. Tamara Soma from Simon Fraser University and Ms. Sarah Reversi from Future Food Institute. And to kick us off, I wanted to direct this question to Ms. Sarah Kirby-Young. And that question is, in your experience, what are the key drivers of food waste? And how do you think they vary across regions and sectors of the food industry? So handing the mic over to you, Ms. Kirby-Young. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here from Vancouver and very grateful to join on this important topic. I'm a councillor in the city of Vancouver, but I also chair the Zero Waste Committee for Metro Vancouver, which represents about 22 municipalities and cities in our region, and we work together. And I think what we see as the key causes of food waste are often inadequate storage, overly long transportation networks, simply taking too long to get the food from where it's grown, production, processed, to where it is consumed, inefficient supply chains, and then ultimately us in terms of consumer behavior. And one of the things that we see in Vancouver, we've got about 7 million people. We have about 2 million people that are living in food insecure households. And yet we know a shocking more than 50% of all the food that is produced in Canada is lost or wasted. So I'm going to say that again, more than 50% is lost or wasted. So that's an incredibly significant amount. And so we have a lot of initiatives we're trying to undertake to combat that. But a real key part of it is how the food is processed, how long it takes to get to us, and then ultimately that we're not making the best use of it.
Thank you so much for highlighting how policy kind of intersects within, food waste reduction, how important that is for driving legislation surrounding liability, as well as easing some of the persisting gaps that exist within the infrastructure of food waste reduction. And I'm excited to dive a little bit more into that later on in this panel. Heading over to Ms. Tamara Soma I would like to ask you the same question and kind of hear your perspective from your sector and your region about what the key drivers you believe are driving food waste. So over to you.
Well, I think Councillor Kirby-Young talked about a little bit about the food system itself and some of the drivers around long distance food supply chain. I'm an urban planner, and so I know that urbanization is also a major contributor because urbanites just in general, they demand more variety 24/7. You know, there's a lack of connection within the system. But I guess one thing that hasn't been covered yet is around the worldviews, education, understanding of what food means. And so in my work at the Food Systems Lab, we're doing a lot of work with youth, which is very exciting, engaging youth from the moment that they step into a school, and working with them to better understand the value of food. So for example, at Simon Fraser University, I actually brought some unwanted zucchinis, organic zucchinis, perfectly edible, perfectly good, and they were rejected by the market simply because of the aesthetics, right? So aesthetic standards and retail standards is also a big driver, to create food loss and waste. And so this is just one way to tap into the youth and get them to start thinking about food in a different way at an early age.
Yes, thank you so much. And I really like what you said about, really understanding what food means to each person, because that is very, very different across cultures, across regions. So it's very important to dive into what exactly food means for individuals of all different ages and backgrounds. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And again, excited to explore that later on in this panel as well. Heading over to Miss Sarah Roversi, I would like to get your insights as well in terms of what you believe are the key drivers of food waste beyond policy efforts. And we talked a lot about education and youth leadership. What other perspectives do you believe can be put into the approaches of key drivers to food waste? Passing the mic to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, of course, education for me and for us is a pillar. I think that for sure one of the greatest challenges is behavioral inertia, and of course also the lack of awareness of what's our responsibility and how much we can create an impact. If we start to think in a very mindful way about what we are eating and how much labor, how much water, how much soil, how many miles have been done to bring this food on our table, maybe people is going to start more and more to reflect on what is his responsibility. I think that we need not only to get people excited to turn waste into new values, into new products, and so on, but also create awareness, because when people become aware, then there is an action of responsibility, and then they're going to become active ambassadors, advocates, pushing and nudging the change around them. And this is something that is happening pretty spontaneously within any community. And for sure, we need to start to narrow much more what is the cultural interaction between how we conceive waste, because in some culture, we know, and we have been working with youth and communities all around the world, we know how much is different the relationship with food waste. Sometimes you cannot waste food because it's a matter of respect. You cannot reuse or recycle the food that has been brought between in the table. So this is something that for some countries is going to be a huge challenge. Maybe if I think about my community, this is something in which we are working pretty easily, but I already know that for some communities, just doing the doggy bag in the restaurant could be something that is a huge challenge.
Thank you so much. And, we really talked about turning waste into new values and products. And I think that's really powerful, because oftentimes we as a society don't think about what comes after the food waste or food loss. So I think, that lack of awareness of what comes after, what can we do to improve the after effects, in a proactive way to maybe even ensure that there are no after effects, that we can stop the problem from happening before it even happens. And so I wanted to pose this question to all of our panelists and kind of get each of your unique takes. We talked about policy, education. I wanted to know, a common thread that you all brought up was the importance of youth engagement. So I wanted to ask all of you, how do you believe we can create these opportunities for youth leadership? Because oftentimes these spaces are not as accessible for young people to share their perspectives and views. How do you believe we can create these opportunities for youth leadership, whether in policy, education, or other spaces of decision-making, so that they can be an active part of engagement in integrating food waste reduction strategies into food systems? And how can we work, through intergenerational dialogue and intergenerational action? So not solely young people or solely adults, but how are we going to create these opportunities for collaborative learning moving forward? So I think maybe we can start with Ms. Tamara Soma and go from there.
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually a professor at Simon Fraser University, and I teach students about food. And one of the things that, I always ask in the beginning is, how many of you can cook? And often actually there's actually not that many. And this is because there's been this disconnect. We learn about math, we learn science, we learn art, but in the actual education system in Canada, there's not a lot of schools. It's not standardized. Some schools do it and some schools don't, that actually integrate food systems education into the school system. So understanding how to grow food from the point of production all the way to the point of consumption, how to process it, cook it, it's hit and miss. So some schools have facilities like kitchens and some schools don't. One thing that's been really exciting, because I'm a mother of 3, is that my children have actually been involved in a farm camp. And at the farm camp, they actually harvest crops. And then when there's some of the crops that are, say they are a little bit broken, or they have some nicks into them and they can't be sold, then they would feed it to the chickens. And, being at the farm, understanding how the whole cycle works is actually so empowering. In fact, my oldest 15-year-old son said that he wants to go back and he wants to work at the farm. And so I think we need to create more opportunities to do hands-on knowledge, whether it be cooking or growing food or understanding how to compost. And those types of spaces and places in the universities, in the education system, should be invested upon. And that way, youth can do things in a really, really fun way. And just one last plug is, please check out the Food Matters Action Toolkit that was developed by the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, because there are hundreds of fun activities for youth to do all across the world.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tamara. And I think it's wonderful that you pointed out the importance of understanding the whole food system, production, consumption, waste management, and how it's cyclical. It doesn't just stop at the end, really understanding where our food comes from and where our food ends up after, food waste, food loss, or, just after it comes to our plate. I think your point about investing in opportunities to gain hands-on knowledge is also particularly important. And I would actually like to call upon Ms. Sarah Kirby-Young to give a little bit more insight about how this can be reinforced through policy efforts as well, particularly within schools and other areas where youth engagement is already particularly high. So passing the mic over to you, Ms. Sarah. I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. This is such a great question, and there's so much I think we could say about this one. So I'll touch on the schools earlier, but then I want to tell a bit of a story that I think really speaks to this point. In Vancouver, we have a lot of great partnerships with nonprofits, for example, where it's use of school lands to grow crops, and then there's an interface or interconnection with school meal programs. So we have one in downtown Vancouver. There's a local chef who was incredibly passionate about food, and instead of working in industry, he came in and is now working in the schools, and he runs this phenomenal program. And all of the kids, like you talked about, Tamara talked about the kids not knowing how to cook, come in, and it's coveted now, apparently. Like, this is a program kids want to participate in, and they're trying to get their spot. They sign up so they can do it once a week, once a month. And they make these fantastic meals, and they not only cook, but they're cooking from produce that they're growing at the schools. And then they have an opportunity to have the meal together, and they talk about the process of where seeing that food kind of come literally from the ground to the table, and they share a meal, and they talk about what that means. And then they also have any additional food can go to local charities so that it doesn't go unused. And so as a kid, it so imprints on their minds because it's that experiential learning. And I think that's a really fantastic story. But I want to talk a little bit in terms of the policy intersection. I'm going to tell a story. Last Friday, I got invited, and I invite some of my fellow counselors by a young entrepreneur in Vancouver with a company called Quantotech, just done a round of funding, and they are going to do indoor hydroponic farming. And it's quite something. And so they were in sort of industrial type of zoning in a building in Vancouver. And we had a great conversation with them, and their greens are spectacular. They're beautiful. They're so like healthy and vibrant. You can extend the growing seasons. You can have butter lettuce at a time of year that isn't traditional. But they told a story how recently with climate, one of our local regions flooded where their farms were in Chilliwack. And they couldn't get to them, but they were able to temperature control and support that food. And they had the local First Nations come in there. But they said our issue is trying to do more here in the urban center and not have the travel time. And I said, well, what's precluding you from that? And she said, well, it's your urban farming regulations, because it's difficult in terms of where you can actually set up these types of businesses. There's only so many locations. We have to draw a certain amount of hydropower. We need partnerships. And so we need to enable that. And I said, okay, well, that's a tangible thing. And so by doing that outreach and having that connection with the folks that are making policy, we're going to take a look at that urban farming policy to say, can we have this in more locations and buildings? Can they do partnerships in strata buildings where people are living and not just where they're working? And so I think that there's a lot that we can do when we come together, just have those conversations.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, your point about cooking from the produce that they're growing, really understanding the root, the sources of the food that we as humans consume, but then also understanding what comes after. I think that's been a common thread throughout, understanding the whole process so that you can immerse yourself within the food system and not just look at food as a simple activity that you do without any depth to it. And so I think all of our panelists here are really highlighting the depth of food systems and the importance of understanding every aspect of it in order to holistically think about food waste prevention, food loss prevention, and all of these different things, which can help design more comprehensive solutions when it comes to the community. And so for Ms. Sarah Reversi, I would like to hear a little bit more about what you believe are some of the enablers for, bolstering our awareness of this education surrounding our responsibility, both at the household level as well as the corporate level, or just looking at various sectors when it comes to food waste reduction. What are some of these enabling factors that can improve this awareness? Over to you.
The best way to create awareness is to let people live experiences. Just telling that something is wrong, you're not going to change the behaviors, you're not going to impress people, you're not going to surprise people. Real change are happening when you're able to surprise people and let them touch with their hands what you're talking about. And this is actually what we have been doing. If I think about the event we have been running inside the UN on July 2019, where we were actually involving our students during the Food and Climate Shapers Bootcamp run with FAO, we were there during the high-level political forum. We involved the students, we involved the scientists, we involved activists, but also we involved the permanent representative from many, many countries. During our event, okay, we have been showcasing and telling stories, but after that, we brought our guests inside the kitchen of Google, showing them how a company like Google is managing food waste inside their kitchen, where basically they were showing that they were scaling the waste every single day. And thanks to the scale, they were showing to their chefs how was basically the impact in terms of money, in terms of water, in terms of the bagged impact that all this waste was causing. And all of this and this amazing system was nudging the change from the kitchen and food service perspective. After that, we brought our delegates to live a deep experience, cooking waste in a very, say, in an interesting area, working with homeless, understanding how much we can turn something that is a waste for us into something that is going to be food for people that are facing the issue of food security also in our megalopolis, also in our cities. And after a few days, some of those permanent representatives came back to us saying, hey, we need to do something. They have been changing. After a few days again, on September, they were presenting a proposal for a final resolution to declare the World Day of Food Loss and Waste. And the permanent representative of San Marino and Andorra, thanks to this little event, we're presenting a resolution that has been voted. And now, finally, we have the World Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste on September 29th. So, thanks to this little thing, how they changed, how they raised their own awareness, just participating, showing up and living an experience. And then they came back and everyone that was joining this event came back different and started doing something in his own environment. So this is what I'm advocating for, and I invite everyone to be an ambassador in its own community. Of course, the ambassadors were playing in their community, and at the UN, they were able to create a huge impact because this day has been creating a huge awareness all over the world.
Yes, no, that's beautiful. And I really think, you highlighted the power of collective sharing of experiences and how everyone comes from their own community, their own perspectives. And it's important to foster spaces for people to be able to openly share these experiences in order for us to learn from each other, actively listen to each other, especially community members who are bearing the burden of when it comes to climate change, and you have, the impacts of food waste on climate and, droughts and all of these natural disasters that are creating such big problems for communities that are so underrepresented in these spaces. It's extremely important to be able to hear the stories and experiences from these individuals. And so I thought you brought that to light in a very, very eloquent way. And now I actually have a question, first question from the floor, from the audience. And this one I will direct to each of you to kind of say a little bit on, starting with Ms. Tamara. But the question from the audience is, combating food waste needs behavioral change, something you all brought up. How do we enhance behavioral change, which could lead to reducing food waste in both developing and developed countries, given the great demand from fast food industries? So we will start with Ms. Tamara.
Wow, that's a great question. It's also multi-layered. So I've actually done numerous behavioral studies at the lab in developing countries, so in my home country of Indonesia, as well as in Canada, in the city of Toronto. And one of the interesting things when it comes to behavior is that actually, and honestly, a lot of people already know that wasting food is not good. So they have that. And for some countries, people are more spiritual or religious. And so in their religion, it actually says that you shouldn't waste food. However, what happens often time and time again is that their awareness or understanding does not necessarily translate into the action. And so an example would be that people know that it's not good to waste, but then when they go to the supermarket, it's really just much cheaper to buy one, get one free, right? Or to buy more because it's cheaper to buy in bulk. And so what often happens is that the retail nudges actually makes people overconsume. So in one of the studies, in other studies, basically there have been recommendations to actually create an enabling environment at even the retail stage to make it so that people do not need to buy too much, do not need to overconsume. It could be buy one, get one later, or it can be having more loose foods, so they're not all packaged in such bulk that people in an individual single household will need to buy so much, when they actually only need a few. And so I think another potential innovation is also in gamification. We had a study where people actually played a game, and they actually the study group that did the game, they actually, when we did a waste audit, were the ones that wasted less food. And so I can share with all of you the resources and the materials. You can even try to replicate the game if you want to. But what I think is that education also needs to be paired with an enabling environment, and that can include retail, it could include policy, it could include city design. So.
Yes, that's awesome. Yes, the enabling environments, figuring out the mechanisms to drive the social behavior change is really, really powerful, because it's not a one solution fits all. You can't just sign a paper and that's the solution. It really does take time, and it takes every individual of the community collectively working together to change the behaviors and the mindsets surrounding food waste reduction at every stage of the food system, from production to the retail to transportation to waste management, all of these different areas. And so I really appreciate you bringing that point up. I'm actually going to direct, we have our next question, and it actually ties very much into behavior change. And I would like to direct this to Ms. Sarah Kirby-Young. And this question is, there is an increasing trend to make people aware regarding the nutritional availability and palatability of all shapes and sizes of food, rather than just eating aesthetically pleasing food. How can we make this trend global so that people not only choose the best looking fruits and vegetables in market, but choose all the shapes and sizes, which would contribute towards reducing food waste? Handing over.
Yeah, great one. I mean, obviously we're human beings, and we eat food, and consuming food is a visual thing for people. It's a very emotional thing as well, because the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes. I appreciate the comments earlier around different cultures. I live in a multicultural household, and having sort of family that are Chinese, you don't waste anything. It's a culture that kind of comes from using, if you're a meat eater or not, sort of using every part of the animal, things are used up. But one of the things that we did in Metro Vancouver on this education piece is create a campaign that's really called Love Food, Hate Waste. And it's done in a really fun, interesting way. It has some great characters. We get people involved. We show up at local events. We have a huge fair here where tens of thousands of people that come through, but it's really encouraging people to use food in different and creative ways. And so it's education, it's things about recipes, it's talking about the climate impacts, how to shop your fridge, so to speak, right? And the fun and interesting things that you can make from that food. So it's not just, sort of it's giving people the fun aspect of it, and not just the doom and gloom of, the impact, the amount of GHGs that went into that food that traveled to you that you didn't consume, and the climate impacts, and, just how sort of intense it is in terms of resource production. But it's really these memorable type of campaigns that we've had huge success with, and that people remember, right? When you say love food, hate waste, and it's really started to see a behavior change, because what we found, for example, when we diverted organics and had green bins and diverted them from the waste system, people were very conscious about that, but they thought they're doing a good thing. And so in some cases, your actual organics and green bin disposal went up. And that's when we started to do the education campaigns like the Love Food, Hate Waste, because it was really about giving people the tools to sort of enjoy the food that they had. And also options, I think, with commercial organizations, with partnerships to divert the food that isn't used. And we've had a lot of success with that, about 650 partners that signed on to one program. So you have different commercial operations, kitchens, food production now that feel comfortable. They don't think they have that legal liability you mentioned earlier, and they're actually able to donate that food and ensure it goes to good use. And sometimes it's turning ingredients that maybe, a veggie is bruised a little bit and it doesn't look, but it's perfectly good and delicious. And so they're turned into soups, right? So you're still appealing to the human element that I'm enjoying good, delicious looking food. You're just preparing certain types of food in a different way.
Yes, that is totally correct, especially, your point about the relatability with community members to improve this applicability of solutions, really humanizing this process and not just looking at individuals as statistics or food waste as, solely numbers, but actually thinking about the food and how it can be used. This is a mindset that we also use. I have my own nonprofit as well, and we have a food recovery program. So redistributing surplus food away from corporate businesses, educational institutions, and transferring it away from landfills towards, homeless individuals, as well as people facing food insecurity. And so it's really providing this direct opportunity for community members to see and experience the entire food system. And we talked about from the producer side, but also the consumer side through initiatives like the Love Food, Hate Waste that you were talking about as well. So we have another question from our audience, and I would like to direct this question to Ms. Sarah Reversi. And this question is, young people can drive change faster in communities than other people, given their network and innovative ideas. What do you think would be the best way for young people to join the forces to drive communal change for fighting food waste? What kind of collective actions could drive the most impactful change, given that young people are trying to foster change in the community despite having little resources? So handing it over to you.
Probably my answer is going to be a bit different from what is expected, but I strongly believe that now we need multi-generational actions, not just young people, but young people together with the entire community. And we can say that just because we have been measuring the impact of joining forces between communities and between generations throughout our bootcamp, for example. During our bootcamps, our youth goes from 16 up to 90. And actually is not the age in your ID card that is something that is going to define who is the youth now. I know that in some situation, young people, young scientists struggle on having access to some environment where they can actually create a real tangible impact. But I strongly believe that this can only happen if we are going to be able to create an alliance between young and senior people, between a teacher and a kid, between an entrepreneur and an activist, between a farmer and a policymaker. And the multi-stakeholder approach, we're talking a lot about private-public cooperation, about multi-stakeholder approach and so on, but now is happening. And we see that impacts are happening when you have this kind of systemic approach that is able to talk the language of every generation. Young people, we work with youth and in schools and young activists and so on, because they are really part of our world at the Future Food Institute, are incredible. The energy, the commitment, the awareness, but they are also a force of nature that can help to also bring all the other generation and all the other people, and they can be the key to open some strategic doors. So this is something that, from my perspective, is crucial, and we are really working, designing initiative, collective actions, community actions, and so on, that are all not just focused on youth, but in this kind of multi-generational approach. And the global approach need to start to be more open to the integral ecological approach, not just being narrow on one specific issue, but really starting touching and putting ourselves and our mind into the awareness that basically to create a real impact and a deep impact, we need to be able to understand what is the political situation, what is the economical impact, what is the health that we are creating thanks to this action, how the society is going to benefit on that, what is the perspective from the pillar of culture, what is the economical impact. So we need always to have not only a multi-generational and a multicultural approach, but also an integral ecological approach.
Yes, I think that is wonderful, really bringing the importance of creating alliances between multi-stakeholder groups. You mentioned young people, old people, people from all different cultures. You're bringing the social perspective, the cultural perspective, the economic, political, and all of these different perspectives, because food encompasses all of these perspectives. You can't simply look at just one and be able to understand the whole context. And so I think it's very powerful how you brought up the importance of looking at all of these contexts in a very holistic manner. And then that way we would be able to really strengthen the impacts of these public-private partnerships, instead of just solely having people from the same sectors or the same age groups, or the same cultures working together. Really having this, especially in our globalized world, having this collaboration between people is extremely, extremely important. And I think we have one last question that I would like to address to all of our panelists, and kind of have each of you go around and give your 1 minute call to action pitch based on this question, which is: how can everyone in an individual level play active roles to cross-sectoral strategies, which were brought in the panel, including fostering climate resilience, improving public health, eliminating hunger, and promoting sustainable consumption patterns? And I think we will start with Miss Sarah Kirby-Young. So over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big question, and I think we're doing it by having this conversation now. And I do agree with the comment earlier around the need for intergenerational connectivity. And I will say I think that it's going to take everybody coming together, because I think that the innovation, quite frankly, is coming from the youth sector. But as you mentioned with the link into policymakers, there are folks that may not necessarily be as young like me, but have the ability to kind of impact and make that change. And so it really is building those bridges together. I think it's about raising the public consciousness. It's about being innovative in terms of land use and allowing, I referenced earlier, things like more urban farming. It's moving to more circular food systems instead of the linear approach. It's supporting innovation and entrepreneurship when you're coming out with different food products and different byproducts from different foods. And I think it's around changing the consciousness of what food is and the role that that has in our life and has for people. I really believe that there's an opportunity to work with different ambassadors. So, you know, we have a very strong chef community here in Vancouver. There's a lot of people that have a lot of influence that can, I'd say, capture the hearts and kind of the motivations of folks. So not just people that are coming at it from a scientific perspective, but from something that connects into people's daily lives. And I think that that's a really important part of it. You mentioned that you're running a food recovery program. We have a number in Vancouver that have been successful. Coordination is really important. Actually, finding one of the challenges there is actually you have too many folks that are wanting to distribute food. And so are they competing in terms of finding places for those foods to go? And so there needs to be coordination. So it's also a willingness to kind of really work together for the greater good. But I think that this is no longer an academic problem. This is no longer, you know, a youth inspired and passionate problem. Like, this is a human problem. And so we sort of really need to take that perspective. And I think that will raise the critical mass of bringing it to everybody's attention. I do think the last thing I'll say too is that sometimes it needs to be a pain point. And we're seeing right now in terms of economic challenges, we talked about food insecurity for folks that are the most vulnerable, but also for your average person, our food prices are going up exponentially with inflation, and people are really conscious. So this is a real opportunity now in people's minds because they're getting hit at the grocery store. They're thinking about how much they can buy, what kinds of foods they can buy. And sometimes that's the time when you can actually really capture mind share to have those conversations. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's great. You know, building upon what we've been talking about is really just involving everyone, I think, is something that we've been talking about throughout, is like the importance of healthy, friendly competition in a way that involves people. It makes people ask these questions, and then thus advance progress toward and accelerate progress towards, you know, with the 2030 agenda and everything. And so I think you laid that very eloquently. So thank you. Passing on to Ms. Sarah Reversi, who I see is already ready to dive in. I would love to hear your thoughts as well in terms of a call to action of active engagement for food waste reduction.
I'm always thinking about numbers because I'm not very good in math, but I'm very fascinated by numbers and the fact of becoming accountable and being able to measure and be able to know what's our impact, how much we're wasting, how much we are getting better, how much we are growing, is something that is very, very, very helpful to take decisions and take actions. I see that in our little community where we have our campus that is focused on integral ecological approach, we're measuring and telling to the citizens how much we're growing, how much we are better and better and better every day. Of course, managing food waste, I'm talking about that. And this is something that is very much motivating, and it is inspiring the municipality close to us, because of course they're saying, okay, you are at 87, I want to beat you, so I want to be better than you. But the fact of being able to measure, this is requiring something that is an advancement in technology. So we need to start to accelerate the adoption of technology. And nowadays, we also have technologies like AI that can help us to better manage our storage, to waste less, and so on. So I strongly believe that we need to start to be better in getting data, collecting data, and using data to take thoughtful decisions.
Thank you so much, and especially your discussion of accountability mechanisms and integrating the adoption of high-level technology and data collection to ensure that we're providing the correct information to the community in a way that's accessible and equitable for everyone. And so I really appreciate you bringing the digital perspective as well. And last note, last but certainly not least, coming from Ms. Tamara, I would love to hear your call to action as well.
Absolutely. So in Canada, I'm an expert judge of the Food Waste Reduction Challenge, which is an initiative by the government of Canada to invest $20 million in innovative solutions for food waste, food loss and waste reduction. So I recommend that you check it out and look at all of the different finalists and see what they're up to and what kind of innovations they're bringing. So there is that kind of, passion and also commitment at the federal level to really address this issue. But most importantly, if you check that challenge, that competition, you see that really when it comes to addressing food loss and waste, that there is a role for everyone, right? Whether you are an engineer or you are a cook or you are an educator, there's always a role for everyone because this is a systems problem, it's an interdisciplinary problem, and this is why we all need to come together. But I'm so excited that you will hear from Chef Stephanie Barluck, she's going to be in the next panel, because we also really need to change our worldview, and a food system that will address the food waste issue, that will address the food insecurity issue, as well as the climate resiliency issue, is a food system that is based on a different worldview, a worldview where we treat one another equitably and sustainably, and also treat the planet in a better way. So definitely, I look forward to Chef Stephanie Barluck's presentation, because she will be talking about the Indigenous perspective, and that in Canada will make a huge difference in how we can tackle food loss and waste.
Thank you for giving the segue to our next panel as well. Very, very excited. Stay tuned for that. But just, as a closing note, I really, really appreciate each and every one of you for your thoughtful insights, as well as, really empowering all of us to think about how we as individuals fit into the food system, but also how we can work collectively together, how each of us, as Ms. Tamara said, has a role to play in this systems-wide problem, and really how we can harness these interdisciplinary mechanisms to drive and magnify social change moving forward, both in food systems transformation and beyond. So big thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. I hope that you all learned as much as I did as well, from a personal note. And I'm very, very excited to see the rest of the workshop, and stay tuned for the panel coming up as well. So once again, thank you so much to all of our panelists, and I would like to pass the mic over to Ms. Leticia. Thank you.
So now we're halfway through our workshop already. So it's not done, and we are in time for some live demonstrations. And we're now going to share with you a quick video that was kindly produced by the Mama for Planet team, teaching how you can compost at your own home. We have here today Ms. Anissa Fariani and Rizal Bari from Mama for Planet. And thank you so much for your support and for joining us. So I'm going to quickly share the video with you all.
Hi, I'm Nisa from Mama for Planet Indonesia, a mother's empowerment project that aims to prevent household food waste. Our project initially aimed to respond to waste emergency situation in Islam emergency, where we successfully reduced 61% of the household food waste by a series of training, education, and also gamification for the local mothers. In this video, one of our super mama, Mrs. Lestina, will show you the simple steps to make a homemade compost from household food waste. Hi everyone, I'm Lestina. Today I'll show you how to make a compost from our kitchen waste. To make a compost, we'll need green material including inedible food waste and leftovers, and a knife to chop the green materials into small pieces. We also need a composter bin right here, an additional bioactivator to accelerate the process. We use EM4 or effective microorganisms. If you don't have it, you can simply use the rice water that has been fermented for 3 days. And last but not least, we also need brown materials such as dry leaves, soil, and woods to make a right humidity for the compost. not too dry and not too wet. Before we make the compost, let's chop the green materials into smaller pieces. Why is it important? Because it will make the decomposition faster. If we don't chop it, we can still use the material, but it will take more time to be the final compost. Now, let's chop it. And now, let's make the compost. Start by adding brown material as the base. Add a layer of green materials and spray the bioactivator. Add the brown material once again to make the ratio of 2:1 and mix it once in a week to speed up the process. After 2 or 3 months, our compost is ready to harvest. We can filter the compost to get final results. And this is the example of the results that has been filtered. See? It's finer. Beside the solid one, we can also harvest the liquid compost. Liquid compost can be fertilizer for our plants. To use the liquid compost as fertilizer, we can mix it with water with the ratio of 1:10. And that's it, we can pour it to our plants. So that's how we make a compost from our kitchen waste. Super easy, isn't it? Don't forget to try it at home for our greener and healthier planet.
But as I said earlier, we have here today Ms. Anissa and Mr. Rizal from Mama for Planet. Thank you so much for your support in this initiative, for being here in our workshop. And I would like to invite the participants to send us some questions, because we have the opportunity here right now to ask directly to the Mama for Our Planet team anything regarding composting, regarding the work, and this remarkable organization on how you can replicate their outstanding work. And just for starters, I would like to invite Ms. Anissa, Mr. Rizal to give us a little bit of knowledge on their work at Mama for Planet and what we want to share here today.
Okay, thank you so much, Leticia, for the opportunity. Hi, everyone. My name is Nisa. Here, I'm not alone. I'm with my colleague, Mr. Rizal here. We're from Mama for Planet Indonesia, a mother's empowerment project that aims to prevent household food waste. Well, our program initially started last year when there is a waste emergency condition in our home city. It's Sleman Regency. So the waste emergency causes the landfill to be closed because of the overload of the waste. And in fact, the waste, more than half of the waste comes from the household food waste. That's why we try to give our solution by empowering the mothers, as we believe that mother has potential to influence other, especially her family and her community. Especially here in Indonesia, we have this kind of female health volunteer that we call cadre. So the cadre role is very significant to influence other mothers' decision making. So what we do in Mama for Planet is we empower those cadres to be the agent of change by a series of training and education, and also gamification, to initiate a behavioral change among mothers so that they can prevent food waste at source. But what we mean by this is that we focus not only in the waste treatment, like what you see, the composting from the food waste, but we try to emphasize on how to prevent the food waste from the meal planning. So after the meal planning, we also educate on how to properly store the food in their home, so there's no food loss and waste. And also, we try to communicate how to eat the food mindfully. So that's what we do. And in our pilot project, we successfully reduced 61% of the household food waste in our target community, compared to our initial target that is only 10%. So that's a key learning for us, that mothers are potential actors to be the agents of change. And as what the panelists said before, it is one of our effort to actually start the intergenerational change, that we know the mother can teach it to her kids, and finally it will cause the intergenerational impact. So it can be a behavior that inherited. And now we're currently working on the policy brief to advance the advocacy of food waste regulation here in Sleman Regency. And in the future, we plan to develop a companion app to help more mothers reduce their food waste at home. Maybe we can talk about it more in the World Food Forum, as we will share about our project more later. Maybe that's all, Leticia. Maybe Rizal, do you have any more insights?
Yeah, hello everyone, and good evening from Indonesia. So I just want to add what the Mama for Planet has done. So we collaborated with so many stakeholders, international stakeholders, national stakeholders, including Ministry of Health and Ministry of Environment in Indonesia, to empower mothers to reduce food waste. And also we have a unique approach that is gamification. So it's not only educational tools that we do or that we approach it. So we do the gamification. So we provide platform that the mothers can access the platform and input the activities by approving the photos or submit the photos. So for example, making compost or store the food properly in the fridge. So when they submit the photos, they can automatically earn the points, and at certain levels of the points, they can receive the gift from us that accelerate the food waste reduction. We give them the composting bins, even we give them the live chickens so they can give the food waste to the chicken. Yeah, so we have the four main steps are the household food waste reductions. So the first is the sustainable shopping, which is we have to stop shopping that's not necessary that we need. The second is the proper storage of the food. The third is the mindful eating, like Anissa said. So we have to take the food portions mindfully, not over. And the last is the food waste treatment, including compost. And yeah, we managed to reduce the food waste 61% on the sampled household.
That's amazing. Thank you so much to both of you. It's definitely inspiring to hear the work of your brilliant organization that does such an important work that is empowering women and mothers. But right now, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Anna.
Thank you, Leticia, and thank you, Mama for Planet, for that insightful video and showing us how we can compost and sharing more about the amazing work that you guys do. Now, I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Andrew Sun, the Assistant Dean of Student Support and Military Service at George Washington University, who is also the staff advisor to the George Washington University Food Pantry. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the panel and Just as an introduction, I work as an advisor for the student-run food pantry at George Washington University. We're a private research university located in Washington, D.C., and have about 25,000 students. And food insecurity really came to our attention around 2016 when a graduate student in one of my classes asked, how is George Washington University addressing food insecurity among students? As a result, the student did some research, and eventually we did a survey of the entire student body, and about a third of all GW students had experienced some degree of food insecurity over the last month. And while this is 2016, the pandemic, and also as mentioned in one of the earlier panels, the increasing cost of food has led a lot of students' budgets to be strained. So having a food pantry where there's no background check, that is accessible 7 days a week, about 14 hours a day, is really very welcome for students, particularly in a city like Washington, D.C. Rents are high. The cost of food is very high. So having a resource like this really helps students. Hungry students can't study, so having a food pantry really supports their academic achievement. So I hope that gives a thumbnail sketch of what we're doing at George Washington. And we also applaud the efforts of addressing food waste by having partners, local businesses that donate food to us. We're very close to the White House, so we're pretty, we have a lot of restaurants nearby, and many of the restaurants will donate non-perishable food like apples and things that are easily transported, as well as perishable food that we have to just be careful with and make sure that we're abiding by food handling guidelines. So I hope that helps as a quick overview, and thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Andrew. We do have a follow-up question really quickly. Someone wanted to know how the food pantry works. How many people do you think you've impacted in your community at George Washington? And overall, what has been the response from students from having this food pantry?
Each year, so last academic year, we had over 650 shoppers who registered and who have access to the food pantry. The response is definitely very positive. Students very much appreciate having on hand both non-perishable foods such as rice, beans, the staples, and then we also stock donated food, typically about donated and purchased food. So we receive donations from Amazon Fresh as well as Panera, are two of our popular donors in terms of donated food. But we also have an endowment that was established by a professor and one of his former students that provides us with a revenue stream each year, operating budget stream, that allows us to purchase food from Wegmans and some other grocery stores that are able to deliver to us. So very positive feedback. Also, I think it's great that I do most of the administrative stuff, the budget and paying for purchased food, but really the students do it all. They run the food pantry. If there's any produce that might be left over, we have a composting system, which I think is really important. So thank you. I hope that helps address the questions. And again, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's great, definitely, to hear how youth is being mobilized at George Washington University and how they're working to ensure their peers are able to have the food that they need to properly study and have a successful academic career. Definitely great to see the impact something as a food pantry can have. And with that, we are going to lead into our next panel, which is discussing creative solutions on food waste. Over to you, Shreya.
Thank you so much. Oh, this has been so great so far, learning about all of these different ways that grassroots efforts are being done to support food waste reduction. And so excited to dive into this roundtable discussion on interactive brainstorming on exactly that, creative solutions. And so our wonderful roundtable participants and speakers for today are as follows. Indigenous chef Miss Stephanie Bariluk, from the food cycler Miss Christina Zardo, and Miss Leslie Thompson. And from Food Wave, we have Miss Dia Suhuku. And I'm excited to kind of dive in a little bit, starting with Chef Stephanie, to learn a little bit more about how you see Indigenous cuisine as an important factor in addressing food waste. And reminder to all of our speakers, please limit your responses to approximately 3 minutes. Thank you. Chef Stephanie, over to you.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. So my name is Stephanie Barluck. I'm originally from Canada's Northwest Territories, and I'm an Indigenous chef. So for your question, I guess growing up harvesting our food in Canada's Northwest Territories, I was taught to respect what was harvested and only take what we needed. Once harvested, and being sure to utilize all the pieces. And when I think of Indigenous cuisine, I think about survival. How did my ancestors survive in the Arctic? And by having to survive, there was limited room for food waste. We learned to appreciate what nature provides, and again, goes back to respecting, only taking what you need, and trying to use kind of all the pieces to limit that food waste, because we couldn't waste up there. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think that's a very beautiful approach to it, trying to use, every bit of the food, from start to finish, and really finding ways to respect all that food provides us and the values that food provides us beyond simply energy and nourishment, and really improving and building connections and relationships with both people around us as well as with the planet. And so I think you bring light to that in a very wonderful way. And so thank you so much. And that leads me straight to my question for Ms. Christina and Ms. Leslie. As we see in Food Cycler, is a very innovative way to compost at home, which is kind of figuring out how to provide more value to food that ends up being lost or wasted. So I'm curious to see kind of what the results you've seen so far have been, and what opportunities do you see to kind of expand or improve upon these innovative ways of composting at home. So passing on the mic to Ms. Christina and Ms. Leslie.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. So Leslie and I work for Food Cycle Science. We're the Canadian company behind the Food Cycler technology. So it takes your food waste and transforms it into soil amendment or fertilizer. Our mission at our company is really to change the way the world thinks about how food waste can be managed. And so in our mission, some barriers that we've seen to composting and its alternatives are accessibility, availability of government services, the high cost of infrastructure and transportation, particularly for underserved communities. Of course, food waste is yucky, it's inconvenient, it can attract wildlife. And I think there's just a lack of awareness of the impact of food waste on food security and the environment. So ultimately, what this boils down to for me is access and human behavior. I think if we can improve the user experience and make solutions more accessible to more people, particularly through affordable government-led programs, that we can empower individuals and even entire communities to take ownership over their food waste. And what we've seen is that when people are empowered, they're more aware, they're more engaged, and they can have a tangible impact on this massive issue.
That's wonderful. Yes, really touching upon the access and behavior change that is necessary to empower a community to really understand why it is that we need these types of solutions before diving straight into the solution, because it's very difficult to try to implement solely a solution to a community without giving giving them any context or receiving any context about what is actually happening in that community. So thank you so much for providing that insight. Handing it over to Ms. Leslie to give a little bit more insight about Food Cycler and where you see your results and innovation going.
Great, thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity. So the results so far, just building on what Christina has started, have been quite incredible. You know, she mentioned the building of awareness. In fact, when we roll programs out, we typically start with pilot programs in our municipal division. And so we're capturing an incredible amount of data that is reinforcing the value and the results that we have here. So these aren't just kind of theoretical assumptions. They're truly 500 to 600 pounds of food waste diverted every year. 80% of people becoming more aware. And so just closing off on that point, I think that we're really measuring the impact we're having the whole way along, and we're able to report that back to the communities that are investing in these solutions so that they know it's working.
Thank you so much for providing more context on how communities can actually stay as involved and as engaged within the entire ideation and implementation process. So not just expecting community members to implement solutions without understanding the overarching context and the reasons behind why, and for those who are creating solutions to understand the reasons behind why certain solutions might be necessary in some communities, but not necessarily work in other communities and need to adapt accordingly. So I think we can move back to Miss Chef Stephanie and learn a little bit more about, from your experience, what resources and support do you believe is currently missing to revert food waste trends? So handing the mic over to you, Chef Stephanie. If she's still here.
Sorry, there you go.
No worries.
So I think in today's world, it's just a lot easier to kind of get your ingredients and your proteins, that a lot of people respect less of the product. It's easier to point out the flaws and to replace it, and leading to more food waste. We need to get back to the basics and appreciate our ingredients a lot more, utilize all the pieces. And there's a lot of good information today, so I'm trying not to overlap and say anything that's already been said. So coming from like an Indigenous chef perspective, that's what I do. I use what I have, and if I don't have all my ingredients, say, for a recipe, I don't get too excited. I just say, all right, let's pivot here and let's use what we have. Because that's growing up where I grew up. I didn't have no restaurants. I had 2 grocery stores. So ultimately, my pantry was the land. That's how I was raised. And I didn't really appreciate that until I finished culinary school. And I'm like, okay, wow, not everybody is raised like this. So I think just kind of trying to do my part, and with the staff I work with or the people I work with, kind of showing them the way I go about producing things in the kitchen, and also in my home life. I got 2 little ones at home, and teaching them now that you don't want to eat the banana that has a brown spot. Let's make a smoothie. Let's make some bread, right? It's all about starting the teachings now in order for us to get to where we want to go. Thank you.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Oh yeah. I think the parts that I would like to kind of re-highlight is, the need to get back to basics, really understanding and appreciating each and every ingredient that goes into our meals and the food that we consume, and being able to use what we have and building upon that. I think that's really, really powerful. Shifting over back to our amazing food cycler panelists, I would like to propose a question about, we talked about some of the challenges and the gaps, but focusing more on, the opportunities to bolster. We were talking earlier in the panel before this about youth engagement and how you believe multi-sectoral collaboration and intergenerational collective learning can help to improve solutions such as composting efforts that you spearhead through Food Cycler. How do you believe we can use the power of people to bolster these and reinforce the solutions that are either already currently being implemented or you foresee will be implemented in the near future? So perhaps starting with Ms. Leslie first.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Let me answer it this way. There are several key areas that demand our attention if we're serious about reversing food waste trends. So first is this awareness piece that we've been talking about so much. And with awareness, you need significant coalitions so that we can broaden the reach. And not just in superficial sense. Specifically when we talk about food waste, it's crucial to showcase a variety of solutions, not just traditional ones. And shout out to FAO and the World Food Forum for their focus on highlighting creative approaches to the issue, because it's important we create awareness that there are a diverse range of tools at our disposal already, like the Food Cycler, which can be tailored to meet the specific needs of communities and individuals. And this is really leading towards a key theme in our mission, which is decentralization. It isn't just something that we're considering, it's really at the core of our mission and what is enabling more food sovereignty decision-making in our communities. So these large centralized systems, they have their place, but they can't offer the adaptability that local community-based systems, especially when it comes to rural, remote, indigenous communities and multi-residential systems, it can't offer them the flexibility that they need. We need to allow for nimbleness and responsiveness, which is really essential for tackling the unique needs. So, when we focus on awareness, but specific to showcasing diverse needs, forming coalitions like this, I think that really is what gives us the momentum to make great change and significantly impact reducing food waste.
Thank you so much. I like the point that you mentioned about the responsiveness mechanisms that are needed and integrating food sovereignty. It's up and coming movement that isn't talked about as much as I feel like it should. And so I think it's a very, very powerful perspective to center community voices and community ideologies within the context of designing solutions that actually fit the context of a community that they're meant to be supporting. For Ms. Christina, we actually have a question from the chat, from the audience, surrounding measurements of environmental impact of food waste and its relationship with the overproduction of food. So how do you think we can measure these environmental impacts, particularly in the terms of natural resource consumption and market dynamics?
So the food cycler comes in when you've already wasted food. So in a way, it comes in really at the end of the supply chain. But one thing that we've seen in our programs and with our technology is that over time, people are using it less and less. And it's not because the novelty has worn off. What we've learned is that when people are intimate with how much food waste they're generating in the first place, they resolve to waste less. And what this can have an effect on is your purchasing habits. So if you're aware of how much you're wasting and you know you didn't need to buy that 3-pack of peppers, the next time you go to the grocery store, you'll just buy one. You'll generate less food waste, but then you'll also create less demand for this oversupply of perfect looking fruits and vegetables and other food. And I think that can reverberate throughout the entire supply chain.
Thank you so much. I think that provides a wonderful perspective of just the overall, again, how we can measure composting and these other initiatives, the solutions that come about it in a way that isn't fully quantitative, but also looking at the qualitative aspects of it and how, again, food is more than just a number. Food is more than just a statistic. It comes beyond that and really figuring out how to put community essence into each of the solutions. And so I think you brought that up very, very eloquently. Passing it on over to Chef Stephanie, I would like to ask you what you believe are the most effective strategies for reducing food waste in households and how individuals can implement those in their daily lives. Kind of like a call to action of some effective strategies that you believe individuals can implement every single day. So passing it on to you, Chef Stephanie.
I think for me,
also just wanted to add up another point that is in combination, because you come from an Indigenous perspective. Do you believe that Indigenous people and local communities have a role to play in solving these problems of food waste? And how do you believe the Indigenous perspective adds context towards these strategies? So kind of a dual question there.
So where I'm from, where I grew up, where I'm located, everything is either trucked in, minimum 12-hour drive, or flown in. So any fruits and vegetables that I had growing up were on the lower scale, but they were fine to me, right? And recently within our community, they started gardening and growing their own fruits and vegetables and herbs and everything. And once people start to do that, the pride of producing your own food, seeing the process, gives you the understanding that, wow, you know, I played a part in this. I'm not going to waste it. I want it to be at the best potential that it could be in whatever I'm making with it. So I think as far as like my Indigenous perspective, I think everybody has a role to play. I think regardless of how much food you have, what type of food you have, you all have the responsibility to be aware of your wastage. Kind of growing up where I did, I just feel like I'm repeating what I'm saying, but it's really understanding, you know. My dad would come home with his harvest. I would see my mom process it. I would see her in different seasons. So in the summer, she would pick the berries. In the winter, we would eat them. In the fall, they would get the moose. She would preserve it either by drying, smoking, and we would have it in different parts of the year. And I think that all comes from, again, survival. What did we need to do in order for us to eat in all these different seasons when maybe the animals or the plants weren't there? So I think putting in that extra effort to be like, what can I do with this, you know, before it becomes food waste? What can we do with it? How can we use it? How can we repurpose it? And ultimately, just having that much more respect for food. Then you'll start to realize, hey, I need to do my part in order for there to be a difference. Thank you.
And thank you so much for providing that, you know, need to increase our respect for food and to really, really pay attention to our connection and relationship with food as individuals and how that does affect our collective public good moving forward. So thank you so much for all of your insights on that. To our amazing panelists from Food Cycler, I have one question that I would like both of you to add your insights on, maybe kind of like a 1-minute pitch for from each of you. And that question is, how can technology like the Food Cycler be used collectively as a community especially for those who cannot afford to purchase an appliance. And so starting off with Miss Christina, and then I'm going to Miss Leslie.
We spoke earlier about accessibility, and I think that doesn't just mean, technology being available. I think it also means technology being affordable. The reality is that our food waste management solutions are very expensive, and many of them are government-led around the world. So that's one of the main reasons that we partner with governments, is to deliver solutions to their community as government-led programs, which makes it available and accessible to a community. And then they can all work together to bring food waste a bit closer to home. Because what we've seen over the last many, many decades is this transportation infrastructure, traditional way of sending food waste away, out of sight, out of mind. But if we can bring it closer to home, then we can really bring a community together and use our food waste as a resource in our soil through government-led programs. I think that's really important. Policy as well. I'll let Leslie answer the rest.
Yeah, and the themes here of awareness, and even what Stephanie was alluding to, which is, that intimacy with your food and your environment. To us, another way to articulate these important concepts are through the lens of the proximity principle. So, if you're not aware, it's really, how can you keep decision making as close to home as possible? So we integrate this into our design philosophy, and it really emphasizes keeping decision making as close to the source as possible. And the approach not only shifts the responsibility towards the closer to the waster of that food, but it fosters visibility and that behavioral change that we need. So we don't think that fundamentally people want to waste food. They just really don't have the visibility or the tools they need to make better and more sustainable solutions. So it's also a way to, partnering with the local governments, democratizing the access to food waste solutions. So by providing these communities with resources and agency to address it in the way that they need, if you're a northern community that needs food or waste flown in or out, a big bulky system isn't really going to fit your specific needs or get to the root of your challenges. So in this way, we hope to center these underrepresented voices in our policy efforts and our advocacy efforts to bring decision making as close to home and building more equitable and effective solutions.
Thank you so much to the both of you for your insightful contributions, especially I wanted to highlight again, keeping decision making as close to the source as possible, and how you talked about the role of responsibility and how we can ensure that those who are contributing most to the problem are gaining that awareness of how to have that behavior shift. And it kind of instigates a more authentic and more genuine form of social behavior change that doesn't seem like it completely changes someone's daily life. It becomes more of a natural form of, just do this little shift each and every day, and this incremental shift will eventually lead to a collective. If we all do that collectively, will lead to an acceleration of progress. And so I thought you both put that very, very nicely. And yeah, this has been so great. I wanted to just highlight a few points that our audience members have actually put in the Padlet link that was placed in the chat. We have the importance of localization of food education knowledge in a simplified context to help grassroots communities adopt a right attitude towards food waste management, making, developing apps such as, you guys had mentioned technology through Food Cycler, figuring out how to use these technological mediums, changing narratives, saying food waste isn't normal, the behavioral food trends and what a good shaped crop and kind of the approach and mindset towards these imperfect foods, smart food labeling, food recovery programs, community composting, farm to table education, and so much more. And so for our audience members, if you all would like to continue adding your ideas to the Padlet, feel free to. This is an open resource for everyone. And once again, thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists for providing your insights today. Again, I learned a lot, and I hope the audience members learned a lot as well. And we look forward to implementing some of these solutions that we discussed today within our own community context and seeing how we can work together to reduce and hopefully prevent food waste moving forward. So thank you all, and I would like to pass it over to Ms. Anna.
Thank you so much, Rhea. I believe this has definitely been an inspiring workshop, and we really hope that everyone here agrees. There are several ideas and insights on what actions there are that we can take, whether it is an individual, community, or policy level. But now for our closing remarks, I'd like to introduce you all to Mr. Rosa Rowlett, who is Senior Enterprise Development Officer here at FAO's Food and Nutrition Division. Mr. Rosa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say that this was a very interesting and very engaging webinar. There's so much that has been discussed that gives us a lot of insights into the different ways that youth can be engaged, and not only as youth, but working with other stakeholders, partners intergenerationally. The fact that we need to bring the young kids to start training them from a very young age to respect and to value food. Because today, what we see in a lot of our communities, people see food as a commodity, and we have to change that. And that's what we learned this afternoon. The whole issue of behavior change is so vitally important. And as consumers, we actually we account for the highest percentage of food waste. What we've heard this afternoon, for Canada, it's about 50%. But similarly, in the European Union, we're talking about consumers as well, 50%. At a global level, according to UNEP, we are at about 11%. So we definitely have to work toward making these changes, giving people, as was highlighted this afternoon, the correct tone in terms of the messaging, so that people see it as a positive move in terms of don't talk about not, but what can we do? Let's take a can-do action. As youth, this is something that's positive that you can do. And we heard so many opportunities exist in that regard. And so we have to, education and awareness are actually pivotal. These are things that we cannot do enough of. It's very important. It's quite interesting that at the Food System Summit, where the countries presented their pathways, FAO did an analysis, FAO's data lab did an analysis of the country pathways, and one of the #1 actions that was required, as identified as a requirement in the area of food loss and waste, is awareness raising. And we really have to work to educate people and to make them more aware of the issues, the impacts of not having enough food loss and waste. We heard some that we're aware of, and then we also learned in terms of the bigger numbers that were mentioned by Divine, we could actually trace back down to some of the issues at a real level that one could actually see what's happening and appreciate those. For example, a professor talked about food insecure students now and the rising prices of food. These are realities in our world today. And so the more we can do, and the more we implement to help to reduce food waste and source, we have to try our best to get that food in people's stomachs rather than also letting it go down the various tracks. We can also, the ugly fruit can be upcycled to food before we consider composting. Composting is something that it works. It's something that is very useful, helpful. It brings the nutrients back into the soil. But in the context of how we look at things, it was also highlighted by one of the speakers, thinking around moving from that take, make, use, waste, and discard, going to more circular systems, where we say we prioritize, first and foremost, the prevention and reduction of food waste, and then going further down into recovery. We talked about all those issues today: recovery, redistribution of that food, and then going into upcycling. But upcycling could take place also from what we have is at the field level that may not meet aesthetic requirements from a buyer. But before we let that become waste, we can actually use it and upcycle it into shakes, into other types of food products. But we can also upcycle the byproducts and use that waste to prevent waste, as is being done in a lot of respects. Now with the byproducts of food, for example, food processing byproducts are used to produce films, packaging films, plastic films that are used as to coat fresh produce. And so doing, what happens, you can actually extend the shelf life of that fresh produce. So there's a lot of opportunities. We heard quite a bit in terms of innovation. And these are some of the things that really, I think, the opportunities exist for you as young people to really benefit from and take some of those things up, and start, even those of you who are doing research, but also aspiring into becoming business people. It's an opportunity that you need to be looking at the potential opportunity. Again, when we talked about education and awareness, we talk about the need for more experiential learning, and these are some of the things that we have to. We can tell people what to do, but they need to experience it so that they can see the difference, and that in itself makes a big difference, because that's one of the things that I do work a lot with people, and these are some of the things that you have to give them information and context appropriate information so that they can make the decisions using that information to take action and to make the difference that we would like to see. The other thing is, I don't want to overstep my 5 minutes, so if you would kindly tell me when I need to stop. If it's over, let me know, please. Okay, just one last, I'll take one last, is the importance of data. In terms of helping us to make decisions. It's very, very important. And we heard it through a lot of the discussions. And when, for example, our colleagues were talking about how they were monitoring the waste with the composting. If you don't monitor what is happening, then you will not be able to recognize what is changing. So all of these things are very important. I think I'm going to stop here. Yes, indeed, it was really a pleasure to contribute and to participate as well. And I wish everybody would join us on the 29th of September for the International Day of Awareness on Food Loss and Waste. It will be observed as a global hybrid event at 4 p.m. And we will ask our colleagues through the WFF to share that information on how it is you can join. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rosa. Definitely very insightful, and I think you made a really good point of how we need to show people a little more on the impact food waste has in their individual lives, and just provide them insight, because a lot of people don't realize that food waste also has an impact on an individual level and on each person. So also thank you for providing such great concluding remarks and highlighting everything that was said in this brief discussion very, very well. I hope everyone is as inspired as I am right now after a panel from academic perspective, research perspective, from a chef's perspective, from an institutional perspective, as well as from a political and government perspective. I think it was great to see the different insights and different outlooks and remarks everyone made on food waste. And I want to thank everyone that's still here with us today. Thank you for joining. A big shout out to our amazing panelists, to Ms. Rosa and Mr. Devine. But above all, we want this to be an invitation to all of you to join us against food waste. And we hope that everyone learned something new from this workshop. And we just wanted to help you feel inspired to join us in the fight against food waste, because together we can definitely make a difference.
And that's definitely not all, because us at the World Food Forum and the World Food Program Free Rise have a challenge for you. So if you scan our QR code here on the screen, you find yourself in the Free Rise platform, where you can join our challenge to raise 25 million grains of rice in 50 days. Now, as of today, we have already reached 50% of our goal, and we still have a month ahead of us. So we count on you to join us in this challenge. Thank you so much for everyone that came here today, my colleagues, our amazing panelists. And we hope to see you all in the continuation of our food waste campaign.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, day, or afternoon.